Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Freely Nourished, the podcast that empowers you to break the cycle of dieting by teaching you to nourish your body well. I am your host, registered dietitian Erin Casey, and I am also the owner of New You Nutrition Counseling, where we believe that you can reach all of your healthcare goals at just about any body size. And as you can hopefully hear, and those of you who are watching on YouTube can see, we have a new microphone. So it was a lot more expensive than the old one. So hopefully the sound is of a much better quality. The old one was just not getting the job done anymore. So we bought a big expensive new one. I will likely be listening to playback and kind of fiddling with the sound settings and things like that over the next couple of weeks. So if it sounds a little different, if there's one that is particularly cringy, I apologize in advance. Sometimes it just takes a couple of times of tinkering to kind of get those things right. But that said, the message delivered shall be the same regardless. So, um, thank you all in advance for bearing with me in that. And I'm serious. I hope nobody is here for the sound quality. I know that it can be tough to listen to podcasts when the sound quality is terrible. However, that's not the majority of why we're here, right? Um, so today I wanted to go through something that I hear a lot. I hear this often from my patients, and that is that they don't want to follow up with me until they feel like they have reached a certain goal, that goal almost always being weight loss. Now, whether they want to have lost a certain amount of weight by the time they come back, or they're just kind of trying to gain some traction, the phrase that I hear often is, well, let me follow up in X number of months when I have some time to show you some quote unquote progress. And by that progress, they mean weight loss. And today I'm going to give you a handful of reasons. I'm in fact going to give you, let's see, one, two, three, four, five, six reasons why that is a bad idea. So, and honestly, six reasons why weight loss, and most of you who, certainly anybody who is a current client of mine, but also most of you who are familiar with my content at this point know that weight loss is like never my first priority with my clients. It just never is. It may be their first priority, and that's okay. We can work with that. But in terms of my expectations of you are not to have significant weight loss each time that you see me. That is, in fact, not how I'm measuring your progress in most cases at all. It is something we can talk about. And if it is a goal for you, that is something that is perfectly okay. But as you heard in my entry tagline, right? Like, we believe that you can reach your goals at any body size. So changing your body size, more specifically shrinking it, is not my goal. It never will be. I'm willing to work with you if it is yours, but it is never mine. And today I want to kind of walk through a little bit of kind of why that is, from a clinical standpoint, but I also want to spend some time kind of talking about other ways in which I actually assess your progress, and hopefully ways that you will learn to assess your own progress too. This is going to drive me nuts. I noticed that there was like a tag hanging off the microphone, just because I didn't pull it off before I set up the mic. So bear with me. Okay. Um, so the reason why weight is not a priority to me, and that honestly boils down to, my goal is your health. And as much as we have all been conditioned to believe the opposite, your weight and your health are actually not intertwined. So I think it's just really important to recognize that kind of right out of the gate. That's why I'm not super concerned about your weight, because I don't believe that it necessarily has anything to do with your health. Are there cases in where that maybe, like, there might be slight exceptions to that rule? Yeah, of course. But by and large, the habits you know, that are going to determine your health, they may also determine your weight, but they may not. And at the end of the day, we know that there are certain habits that are going to improve your health, and they may or may not improve your weight or change your weight. I shouldn't say improve, because that would be assuming that smaller is better, and it's not. So my goal, first and foremost, is your health. My goal, kind of a sub goal, I guess, of that is your relationship with food and your relationship with your own body. Those are two things that get very, very disordered very, very quickly. Those of you who know me or work with me one-on-one, you know that I am like, always on radar, right? For that disordered eating habit, because that is not going to serve you in the long run. Even if it's not a full-blown eating disorder, it's not going to serve you, and it's not going to help you reach your goals. And in fact, it's going to make everything you are trying to do that much harder. So again, my goal is not your weight, but simply because your weight does not necessarily impact your health. It just doesn't. We don't have reason to believe that it does. And I'm going to do another podcast on this, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it here. But the American Medical Association, who have been kind of the greatest kind of pushers of this idea that, weight and health are intertwined, and like the BMI is like a tool to use, or like BMI is associated with health, and the BMI is kind of like how we should be assessing fat mass. They've actually come out recently with a statement condemning it. So I want to, really, I'll break that down into much more detail in a future podcast. So stand by. But basically, we don't have reason to believe that your weight and your health are intertwined. So that's why I don't care about it. I care about you. I care what your relationship with food looks like. I care what your relationship with your body looks like. And I care about 100 other health metrics, including lab, sleep, stress level, mental health, like all of those things. I care about all of that significantly more than I care about your weight. So I encourage you to kind of look at other aspects as well, because this is really how you know if you're doing well or if you're not. You can lose weight and have a trash relationship with food and a trash relationship with your body, and you can be over exercising and you can injure yourself, and you could be malnourished and your hair could be falling out, but yeah, you're losing weight. Like, that doesn't mean you're healthy, right? So I'm going to walk you through kind of what I do look for, and then we can kind of, go through maybe some non-scale ways that you can assess it yourself. So the biggest thing I look for is just generally overall, how are you feeling? Because the reality is, if you're not hydrated, if you're not sleeping well, if you're not eating enough fruits and veggies, if you're not eating enough protein, if you're not eating enough carbs, if you're not eating enough, period, you're gonna feel like trash. So you're just gonna feel like, I'm tired all the time, I'm lethargic, I don't have any motivation, my mental health is maybe in the toilet. You maybe, if you're somebody who struggles with blood sugar issues, those might be up and down and kind of everywhere. So it is, honestly, kind of your overall, and those of you who work with me one-on-one know this. I almost start every session by asking people, like, okay, like, how have you felt since our last session on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being the best you felt in your entire life, 1 being the worst. And honestly, that sounds like a silly barometer, but it actually helps. And it helps to kind of keep track of that session to session, because then we know, okay, well, these were our goals. This is what we tried to do. This is how we felt as a result. And whether or not we met the goal is almost irrelevant. It's just kind of, this is how we felt in doing it. So I care, about your energy level, how you're sleeping, how your stress level feels, your mental health in general. If you're somebody who struggles with anxiety or depression kind of at baseline, do those things feel better or worse since the last time I saw you? And some of the reason for that may have nothing to do with nutrition. Like, it may be situational, it may be, work related. It could be one of a million factors. But the reality is, my job as a practitioner is to meet you where you are. I can't do that if I don't know where you are, right? So I'm going to ask you, how are those things going? Because I care about you as a whole human, and I'm also treating you as a whole human. If you are in the throes of some kind of work stress to where you just can't even like fathom making nutritional changes right now, that is okay. But I need to know that, right? And that's okay. It's not you're wasting my time. It also could be that, the changes that you ideally want to make just aren't feasible right now, because you have 3 different kids playing 3 different sports, and your job is eating up your time more than it normally does. And that's fine. I almost promise you, and in fact, I do promise you, that I can give you strategies to help make baby steps towards whatever your goal is, no matter what the circumstance. Like, absolutely 100%, no matter what the circumstance, I can give you strategies and tools that are going to help. But I can't do that unless you tell me realistically where you are. If your mental health is in the toilet, tell me. We will talk about easy, quick meals. If your time is just like super crunched, we maybe talk about meal prep or, trying out like one new meal a week or something like that. It doesn't have to be super complicated or super elaborate. But I think so many of you come to me with this unrealistic expectation, honestly, of yourselves that I'm gonna give you a list of things to do. You're gonna do it perfectly. And then we're gonna build on that every single session. That is not how this works. Anybody who's ever been to therapy, you don't go to therapy, you talk about the problem, and then the therapist maybe gives you a solution and then it's never a problem again. Like that's not how therapy works either. So if you're going to your therapist with those ideas, definitely stop that too. But it's much more of a continual kind of unpacking, reprocessing. Yes, there are still tools and strategies that you're going to use, of course, and you're going to use those with varying degrees of success, right? Like there are going to be things that they tell you to do, and like you're going to forget all about it until the next time they ask you, like, you know what? I forgot about that. I sure did. Let me try that again. Or I tried that and it didn't work for me. Nutrition is very similar, right? There are going to be strategies that I give you and you're like, I tried that and it didn't work. And then people don't want to come back. No, come back and tell me it didn't work and tell me why. And then we can come up with a new one. That's so, again, I care about all of that. I also care about things like, how are you feeling kind of moving around in your body? How do your joints feel? How is your flexibility feeling? If you exercise, how does that exercise feel? How is your breathing? How is, kind of other measures of a cardiovascular fitness? Like, are you finding that you're getting gas quicker? If you're a lifter, like kind of how is that going? Are you able to kind of consistently show up for your lifts? Are you able to consistently put out the effort that you want to for them? All of those things matter. They matter a lot because a lot of that is a measure of energy, right? It is a measure of how much you have on board. And if you are consistently dogging it in your workouts, that's a huge sign that you're not eating enough. Right. If you are consistently like unable to get out of bed or get motivated to go work out, that is also a huge indicator that you're not eating enough, right? If your body is working to conserve resources, it's going to be hard to get it to do much of anything. So, a lot of, we'll assess those types of things as well. Of course, I care about your labs, right? Like, and those are going to be things that are only measured every so often, right? So I care a lot about things like your electrolyte balance. I care about your fluid balance. I care about, your kidney function, your liver function, your metabolic function in terms of like cholesterol, other blood lipids like triglycerides, your blood sugar, and things like that. I care about all of that. We're only going to measure it every so often. But again, it's a huge determinant as to like how you're feeling. Sometimes you feel like trash, even though it's not going to show up on blood work, but sometimes it does. So I think that those are things that are always going to be in the back of my mind that I want to kind of have questions about. A lot of times, if like something just doesn't feel right, the answer is to get more blood work, right? So very often I have people coming in, motivation is a big one, or like they're so tired of this. And it's like, well, let's check stuff. Like, let's check vitamin levels. Let's check your thyroid. Let's check maybe like cortisol and like some inflammation markers and things like that. Like, let's get a deeper dive and see if there's something else going on here. And again, so often I just hear people blame it on themselves, be like, oh, like I just don't have the willpower or the discipline or something to that effect. And that's just not true. If you're not able to do the things that you want to be able to do, there's a reason why, and 9 times out of 10 the reason isn't like just you. 9 times out of 10 there's some external reason, and maybe something that we have to navigate around, like time constraints and things like that, or it may be a very real, like you're tired because you're not eating enough kind of thing. So kind of keep those things in mind. If your goal truly is weight loss, and again, there's a huge difference. I've talked about this kind of a lot on other podcast episodes, so I don't want to harp on it too much here, but there is a very big difference between weight loss and fat loss. And I want to be very, very clear that fat loss specifically, which means you are losing excess body fat, is only going to happen at a rate of 2 to 4 pounds per month. Okay. I'm going to say that again for those of you who maybe weren't listening the first time. Maybe you got a back seat. 2 to 4 pounds per month. That is it. So when you are aiming to lose weight, a lot of you come in here with the expectation that you're going to lose something like 10, 20 pounds a month. No, you physically can do that. That I will talk about what that looks like in a minute, but that is not fat loss. Fat loss is very, very slow, and that's by design, right? Our bodies were not designed to lose weight. They were designed to survive. So they were, in fact, survive for millennia of human existence through shortages and famines and poor harvest months and things like that, because they adapted very well to conserve resources. So when you go and take that body that adapted through millennia of all of that and you put it in a situation where it's deprived of a certain number of calories, or you're trying to make it smaller, it's going to be very resistant because that's what it did not evolve to do that, right? So I think it's just really important to kind of keep that perspective in mind. And again, true fat loss, which is when you want to lose weight, you want to target fat. We do not want, your body is made up of lots of components, right? It is made up of bones. It is made up of organs. It is made up of tissues like muscles and, fluids and all of that kind of stuff, connective tissues. And then it is made up of fat, right? So of all of that, we want to keep most of it exactly where it is. In the case of muscle mass, sometimes we even want to increase that, right? But where we want to lose things is we want to lose the excess fat. What that means, what it looks like, for the love of God, don't look at the BMI. But those are things that we can kind of just establish together, kind of what is a realistic goal for you, because I promise you the goal is never going to be what the BMI says it is. That's just simply not true. That said, we can just kind of work together to kind of talk about what a realistic goal might be. But that said, getting from A to B is only going to happen at a realistic rate of 2 to 4 pounds per month. That is half a pound to a pound per week. And I guarantee you there will be stalls and plateaus and all kinds of other stuff in there too. So you will not lose a full 2 to 4 pounds a month every month. It's just not going to happen that fast. That's really frustrating and kind of shocking for people to hear. And they're like, but I see so-and-so on this medication, or so-and-so had surgery and they lost so much more weight. Yeah, they did, but it was not all that. I promise you a good portion of it, in some cases up to 50% of the weight they lost, could be muscle mass. Now, is that going to necessarily harm your health? Probably not. But it is not the weight loss that most people are aiming for. So I just want to be kind of clear on that. It's also a really good way, especially if you're talking about like a diet or a supplement or an injectable medication that just lowers your appetite. That is, you are going to lose muscle and you're going to lose fat in conjunction when you are losing weight at any point faster than 2 to 4 pounds per month. So if you are losing 5 pounds a week, or, less, more, whatever, if you are losing more than 5 pounds a month, you are losing muscle. And I'm going to say that again, everybody in the back. If you are losing more than 5 pounds per month, you are likely losing muscle in addition to fat. What that means is that your body is going to rapidly replenish and rebuild that muscle the second it gets the chance. So if you are on a kind of crash diet, the second your body has adequate calories, it is going to plump your muscles back up to where they used to be. If you are on a medication that just lowers your appetite and you're not eating as much, you're losing muscle. The second you come off of that medication, you are going to plump back up and your body is going to refill that muscle mass that it lost. It's probably also going to rapidly regain the fat mass because you lost it essentially under a state of duress. So again, it's going to be slow. That said, the positive. So I told you all the doom and gloom, right? Of like fat loss is super slow, and almost painful at times. The good news is fat takes up a lot of space. So like a pound of fat takes up a significant amount of space on your body. What that means is that even though you may not lose a lot according to the scale, you will notice changes in things like measurements if you take them. Your clothes are going to fit looser. You're going to feel like you're carrying around less weight, which may relieve some pressure on your joints. It's also, may make you like kind of less fatigued or less winded as quickly when you're, going upstairs or something like that. So you're going to notice those differences because even though it's not a true amount of a ton of weight that you've actually lost, it's going to take up a lot of space. And what that means is that you feel a lot different and you look a lot different, even though the amount on the scale has not changed drastically. Okay. So kind of to that end, there are other ways that if your goal is weight loss, there are ways in which you can assess fat loss, which, first of all, your goal should not be just weight loss. Your goal should be fat loss. And when your goal is fat loss, there's better ways to measure fat loss than the scale. Those can be composition analyses. So those can be things like a bod pod would be a really good example. They also have like the BIA things, which are like either some scale, like fancier scales have them. Or like a lot of times gyms or trainers have the thing that it almost looks like the Mario Kart little wheel that you basically like hold your arm straight out. What that does is it sends an electrical current through either your arms if you're holding it or your legs if you're standing on the scale. And it basically measures the time that it takes for that current to come back. That will tell you kind of proportionally, it's going to move a lot faster through muscle and water-based tissues than it is through fat. So the longer it takes for that signal to come back, the more fat mass you have in that particular area of your body. The bod pod is more of a displacement method. So it's going to measure how much like air you physically displace inside the pod relative to your weight. And then there's some fancy math that the computer does that kind of figures out your fat mass percentage based on that. But point being in all of that is that it's going to tell you more realistically how your composition is changing. And I always recommend those, especially for people who, if your goal is to gain muscle and lose fat simultaneously, you're going to have a real hard time determining whether any of that is going well using a scale alone, because your weight just may not change and you won't know why. So I always recommend those things. That said, I don't recommend doing them more than like once every 3 months or even every 6 months. Some trainers and gyms and things like that will have you do them like once a month. That's not terrible practice, but it will sometimes feel defeating month to month. You're going to see bigger differences the longer you go in between. So I personally really like a 3 month kind of mark, just to kind of, keep you on track and keep you accountable. But what we're looking for is overall trends. So the biggest difference, like even if you measure every 3 months, you're really going to want to compare your data, like at, from January to December or something like that, because again, there's still snapshots. So you're going to look at overall trends. And so that's where I recommend those things. You can do a good old fashioned tape measurements. Those can be really helpful. That said, any of this, but particularly the tape measurement, can feel really triggering sometimes to people, especially if you have body image issues and especially if your image issues kind of center around a part that you're measuring. That said, you can, like, if for example, your tummy is like the part that you feel the most self-conscious about, don't measure your stomach. You can measure your arms, you can measure your waist, you can maybe measure your arms, maybe measure your bust, measure like thighs, things like that. And like just avoid your stomach altogether if that's the part of your body you feel most self-conscious about. That said, sometimes for some people, measuring is just not the best option. And that's okay. That's totally fine. You can do it without it. Like I said, there are lots of other options. But again, I just kind of want to really hit home that using the scale alone is never going to be the thing that tells you whether or not you're losing fat. It's just not. So I think and fat mass loss is going to be so slow that you need to expect that. You just do. And if that's the only way you're measuring your success, then you're kind of going to be shit out of luck, because measuring it by weight loss or fat loss alone is still not a full measure of whether or not you're being successful, right? Another huge measure of whether or not you're being successful is whether or not you're being consistent. And again, I want to be very, very clear that being consistent or an inability to be consistent does not necessarily mean that you are the problem. If we set a goal to eat 3 vegetables a day every day and you just cannot hit that, My question is just why? Why is that the case? There may be very real reasons why you can't, and that's okay. That means we need to adjust the goal. And that's okay. Right. But what often happens in people, and I see this a lot, is that we get stuck in this like black and white thinking of like, okay, I set the goal. I want to do that 100% of the time. And if I can't do that, I'm not going to do anything. Right. You've got to get away from that mentality, right? If you can't do that, we need to figure out what you can do. Now, you can do that by yourself. You don't necessarily need a dietitian to do that. Be like, okay, I can't do 3 vegetables a day, but I can consistently get 2. Great. Then that's your new goal, right? But a lot of people, what I hear is that I can't do 3, so I'm not going to try to do any. And that's where you're never going to get anywhere with your goals if that's your mindset, right? So I would, and I think having somebody check in with you regularly is a really good way to catch that. Because most of you listening to this, I'm going to go ahead and guess that you're not certified counselors and you're not clinically trained to catch these things. And even if you are, it's hard to be objective when you're looking at yourself, right? So just having that like third party objective opinion can do a lot to kind of save you, frankly, from yourself, right? And in a lot of ways of, okay, like I'm having a really hard time meeting this goal and I just don't know what's wrong. And like your natural dialogue is probably going to be to blame yourself because that's what diet culture has trained us all to do. But I encourage you at the very least to ask yourself the question, what if I am not the problem? What if the goal is not manageable? And see where that takes you, right? I would, of course, love to coach every single one of you through every single one of those problems, but that's not realistic, right? So, something you can take home from this episode is just if I can't meet the goal, where is it falling apart? Right? Is the goal even manageable? Clearly, the goal is not manageable. The question then becomes, okay, why? It's not you and it's not your motivation. So just take those 2 options right off the table right away. What's the real reason? Is it your schedule? Is it that you don't like vegetables? Is it that you don't have time to cook? Is it that you don't like to cook? Is it that you're too tired to cook? What are the real reasons why? And then what are the solutions to those reasons, right? It can be things like finding simpler preparation methods. It can be things like spending time first exploring vegetables that you like and then trying to incorporate them into your diet more often. It can be that you you're too tired because you're not sleeping well or your job is stressing you out and you need to focus first on stress management and sleep hygiene and then come back to the vegetable thing, right? So there's always a why, and it's never I would honestly go on record and say it is never you. It is never just you. There is a reason. So if you want to kind of practice this yourself, start asking yourself, okay, if I'm not the problem, then what is? And see where that takes you. And then, of course, always there's time. You can book things with me and see if that is a solution, or something that we can work through together. But again, kind of regardless of who you're interacting with, and like I don't care if it's me, I don't care if it's a personal trainer, I don't care if it's your doctor. Like if anybody is checking with you on a regular basis, they should be approaching things and asking you those same questions. So, you know, go to it honestly. Don't feel like, oh, well, like I just can't seem to hit this vegetable thing. So I'm going to give myself like 3 months to just kind of like white knuckle through it. No, use the resources, use what you have at your disposal to help you kind of tease apart what is really going on. Cause that's what we're trained to do. Um, the other things I want to look at kind of have more to do with your mentality around food and your body. So, two of the biggest things I look for, and these again can be measures of success, are how stressed you feel around food and how stressed you feel about your own body. Because I've said this on other podcasts, and I'll say it again here. I don't know a single person who is specifically a single person socialized as a woman, but honestly, I don't know that I know anybody at all who has never experienced some sort of issues with how they feel about their body, whether they want it to be bigger, smaller, a different gender than it was assigned at birth. There's just so much, right? To unpack. And it is really hard to nourish yourself properly until you have the mentality that nourishment is a sign of love and that your body deserves love. I'm gonna say that again for those of you who maybe like didn't quite get it. It is going to be really hard to improve, honestly, any of your habits, nutrition or other health habits, until you see them as a gift to your body and until you see your body as worthy of that gift. A lot of times we are motivated to do these things by a hate for our body. Like I want to eat vegetables because like I hate my body and it doesn't deserve cheesecake, or I want to go to the gym because like I hate my body and it needs to be smaller. And the gym's going to make me do that. Like none of that is going to work. It's never going to work. That was never the goal. Um, and until you view your own body as worthy of love and until you start to view these habits as an expression of that love, you're never going to get anywhere. So a lot of the early work for most of my clients, frankly, comes down to fully accepting their body for what it is and what it's capable of. And you don't have to love every part of it. You certainly don't have to love it every day. But understanding that it is beautiful and valid and deserves to be here, and then that changes everything. Um, the other thing we spend a lot of time unpacking is just this fear mongering that has gone on for decades too long, right? There's so much misinformation about nutrition out there. Most of it, frankly, is like most of it is not based in any sort of truth. Like if you're hearing, and again, I will go on record and say this, if you are hearing that you should avoid a certain food, stop right there because that is not true. Heard it here first. If somebody or something is telling you you should avoid this food, it's a lie. There is no evidence on this earth that indicates that any of us should avoid any food. Absolutely, period. It's not even like a in moderation thing. Like there's no food that is unsafe or unhealthy for you to eat. Take to the bank. It's true now. It'll be true centuries from now. And the only exception is, yeah, okay, if you're allergic to something, avoid the food you're allergic to. Like that could be bad, right? But other than that, there's nothing. There is absolutely nothing. Um, so I think kind of what, but a lot of that, while a lot of us have been conditioned and like learned, like, oh well, like these foods, we've first of all been conditioned to think that being fat is the worst thing that can happen to us. But the other thing we've been conditioned to believe is that certain foods are going to make us fat or certain foods are going to negatively impact our health. And they're not. It's just quite simply not true. And I wish it was, honestly, because that would make it a lot more simple, but it's not. It's way more nuanced than that. So I think it's just really important to kind of start unpacking. And a lot of times these are almost like subconscious things because they're things that we've been told for so long that we in earnest just assumed were true. Like a big example is, that carbs or carby foods such as like, rice and pasta and bread and stuff like that are either going to make you gain weight or like they're empty calories and like stuff like things like that, like things that, if you're hearing this and you're just like, wait, what? Um, again, you assumed that that was true because it's probably what you've heard your entire life. And honestly, a lot of my early work with most of my clients is just unpacking, like learning to understand, and they're learning to understand it kind of along with me is what assumptions do I have about food and what of those do I need to release? And the answer is in almost all cases, like you need to release most of them. We just need to identify them first. So I think that is a huge part of our work because what happens then when you start when you start letting go of some of those I'm going to call them restrictions because it's basically you thinking certain things are bad for you. So once you let go of that assumption, you start letting go of the restrictions you're holding on yourself. And again, a lot of this is subconscious. A lot of people don't even realize that they're restricting certain foods or food groups or feeling guilt or shame for eating them because it's just how we've existed our entire lives. We didn't know that there's any other option. So once you let go of those assumptions, you open up this huge world of options in terms of like foods that you really like and can enjoy. And it actually makes things a lot easier because now you have more options to help you meet your goals. So I think that's a huge part of what we do. And a lot of how successful you're being at doing that is how much stress you are feeling around food. If you are feeling like, oh my gosh, I never know what to make, and I'm like over analyzing every choice of what I put in my body, and I never know if it's good or if it's bad, or I hear this or I hear that, and I'm just, you're basically scared to eat. There's a huge problem. That is not normal. That is not normal to be scared to eat. That is not a normal thing. Food is meant to be pleasurable. Food is meant to be rewarding, but it is not meant to be scary. And so if you're feeling stress and anxiety about the choices that you're making, chances are really, really good that you are not giving yourself enough choices to make, and you're putting too much pressure on them to either fix or like alleviate some health consequence that just simply isn't the case. So I really encourage you to dive a little deeper with that. And just kind of, again, I'm happy to do it for you. But again, if you pay attention to the decisions you're making around food over the next week or so, and just kind of notice the thoughts that come up of like, even something as simple as like, is this a healthy choice or an unhealthy choice? I mean, like, in my opinion, that is a trash garbage like way to look at food. Like, yes, foods can be more nutrient dense and less nutrient dense, but that's different than saying they're on the whole healthy or unhealthy. Like, you can eat fast food and like you shouldn't be stressed about it. I'm not. I eat fast food plenty and like I'm not stressed about it. Because I know that it is not necessarily harmful for my body because I give it plenty of other nutrition. Um so, I definitely encourage you to kind of take a deeper look, because you likely are restricting yourself more than you need to, and that is going to just make everything harder when you are just trying to do, kind of when you have yourself on a very narrow path. It's a lot harder to stay on that path versus when you give yourself a wider path with lots of like branching off options that come back to the main path. It's a lot easier to stick to that. And that's what you can and should be aiming to achieve. Um, Another thing that kind of comes with all of this of stress around body and stress around food is confidence. So, how confident are you? Not necessarily in like the size and shape of your body, although that is important too. More of how confident are you in your ability to feed yourself, which sounds super rudimentary when we think about it. It's like, okay, I'm an adult. Like, I should be able to feed myself. Like, no, because nobody taught you how to appropriately, right? I just went through a whole list of lies that we've all been told about our bodies and about food. And like these things keep coming, right? Like the second we debunk one in full, like there's another one right behind it. It will likely never end. So, it's important to recognize that like that's going to kill your confidence, right? If you feel like you can't do anything right, again, that's a really slippery slope into like that all or nothing of like, well, if I can't do it right, I'm not going to do it at all. That all or nothing mentality is right there, but it just shakes your confidence. A lot of us too were just simply not trained to cook. We used to have like home ec classes and things like that, and that was like super gendered and like misogynistic, and like fully understand that that was not great, but it also did make sure that at least some people had a good grasp of kind of basic cooking skills. Most of us have not gone through that. I know that I certainly didn't. And I'm kind of like of the elder millennial. My understanding is that like it's still not really a firm part of all school systems today. Sometimes it's an elective or something that people can take, but like if you didn't have like a parent to learn from or a grandparent to learn from, if your parents didn't grow up, cooking many of your meals, and like you had no exposure to it in school, no like outside extracurricular exposure to it, like you very well, like most people go off to college and have like no idea how to make anything for themselves. And it can be really tough. And especially then you throw on other things like budget constraints and time constraints. And if you are like restricting because you think certain foods are bad for you constraints, then it becomes a lot harder to feed yourself. And a lot of times, like those are strategies I talk about with clients too, is How confident do you feel being able to get in the kitchen and prep a meal? And some people come in and, they have, their whole family is full of cooks and things like that. And like, that's great. But a lot of people don't, and that is perfectly okay. It's perfectly normal. And building that confidence and kind of feeling more comfortable getting in the kitchen, even if it's not just getting in the kitchen, like pulling together a grocery list, going through recipes, reading through recipes, being confident and being able to do those things is going to make them feel less daunting, which means you're going to be more likely to do it. Right. So having that confidence, like, is as almost like superficial as it may seem, it's really not. It's actually really, really important because it's going to determine your willingness to do it, right? So I think that's really important too. Um, and then the other thing, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but kind of your sleep quality is another thing that's important. I mean, I think we all know that getting enough sleep is important. Most adults need 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. And don't think, like, if you're listening to this, you're like, oh, well, I've always only needed like 5 or 6. No, you don't. You need 7 to 9. Like, they're like, most adults need 7 to 9. And like, I promise you, listening to this, you are most adults. 7 to 9 hours, get your ass in bed on a reasonable hour, right? Now that said, we all can know that you can lie in bed for 9 hours and still sleep like shit, right? And there's a lot to that, right? Like, mental stress plays a huge role. There's, some evidence about like blue light exposure, um, other mental health things like just, job stress and what have you. All of that's going to play a role, and honestly, to an extent, always will. But nutrition plays a role too. There's not a whole lot of data that, like, eating before bed is necessarily going to disrupt your sleep, although that is kind of a theory that, we chat through. The data is limited. I will say that it's there, but it's limited. But for most people, I would make the argument that that's not the problem. It's more of like a lack of balance in the diet. It's not like well-timed meals. It's stress around food and your body and things like that. Honestly, like that feeling of shame that can hit you after like you eat something, you're like, oh man, I just feel so bad about that. And like, I need to do this, that, and the other thing to alleviate the shame, the next day or what have you. That's what's going to keep you up at night, right? So stop that. Right. And I know that that's easier said than done, but kind of as we've talked through this whole episode, there's a lot of strategies that, a dietitian or, coach or a trainer, that people can help you with, that don't have anything to do with the scale, and they don't have anything to do with like fitting you and your needs and habits into a box that's meant for other people. It is perfectly okay for things to work for other people and not work for you. That's fine. The goal is to find what does work for you. And once you do, then kind of that stress and fear and shame and all of those negative emotions that honestly probably most of us don't realize how significantly we feel them around food and body and things like that. But, again, that cycle of, oh my gosh, I ate, potato chips before bed and I feel so bad about that. And I'm never going to lose weight if I keep doing that. I need to go to the gym like 5 days next week. And then like I need to do cardio on the 6th. And like I'm cutting out all carbs for the next like 48 hours, or I'm going to do like a juice cleanse or like whatever. Like, those are not normal thoughts. Those are not normal thoughts. Those are not normal feelings about food or your body. Are they common? Yeah. Oh yeah, they're common, but they're not normal. And that definitely can disrupt your sleep. It's also, and I've said this on other podcasts before, and I'll say it again here, the amount, like that whole scenario that I just described, like I could feel myself tensing up with it. And when I say that, the stress you feel about food is worse for you than any food you could possibly eat. I mean it. There is nothing you could eat that is going to do as much damage to your body as the stress of the situation I just described. So when you come to me and you're like, I'm so tired and I'm so worn out, I just don't have any motivation, how much of it is due to that stress? Of that guilt and shame cycle of, I ate this and I didn't want to. So now I need to, restrict things, or I need to get on it, or I need to eat clean, or I need to do a fast or a cleanse or whatever. Like, anytime you think you need a reset, you don't. What you need to do is forgive yourself and move the fuck on from whatever you think you need to do. Like, again, you don't need to reset. You just need to move forward. That's all you need to do. You don't need to compromise. You don't need to like compensate. You just need to move the fuck on from it and let it bygones be bygones, right? You do not need to do all this extra stuff that you think you need to do. It's just going to drive you nuts, and that is what's going to wear you down. That's what's going to make you tired. That's what's going to make your body sick. Eating potato chips will not. So with that, I will leave you all until next time. Let me know in the comments how we are feeling about the new microphone, if the sound settings need to change. I can also reposition it to some extent too. But let me know what you think, and I will see you all next time.